Good morning. This is the Blaine's World webcast that can be heard each week on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. You can also listen in on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. You can find more information about past shows, previous shows, and this show at my website, which is behind me, blainesworld.net. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, and I'm here in my Zoom studio in lovely downtown Fairview, North Carolina. Each week, we focus on information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And toward that end, it's my pleasure to introduce Ben Prater, Southeast Program Director at Defenders of Wildlife, for being my guest today. And Ben, you can wave to all your fans and friends who are watching this. So,
Hey, folks, good to be with you today.
and that is Ben Prater. Ben Prater is a career conservationist. He supervises and directs Defenders of Wildlife's efforts to protect wildlife and the habitats in the Southeast. He's responsible for leading a field team focused on rare and threatened and endangered species throughout public outreach, effective advocacy, and the application of science, law, and policy for the conservation of biodiversity. And so, Ben, the first question I typically like asking somebody first time we meet is, as a kid, you grew up where?
So I grew up in an area known as upstate South Carolina, so Spartanburg County, about an hour south of sort of the Asheville area. So not too far from here.
Okay, and so as a kid growing up, did you always know you wanted to be in conservation?
That's a great question, Blaine, and one I love to talk about because one of my big passions is getting young people excited and exposed to the outdoors. I was very fortunate as a young person, growing up in a relatively rural location, so had a big backyard, exploring the woods and farms near my house. My parents enjoyed getting us outside, hiking, camping, and I got involved in the Boy Scouts, and that was a huge part of my life and really exposed me to not only the amazing adventures that were possible in the outdoors, but also to learn to explore all just the way nature worked. And I was fascinated by it. So from a very young age, I collected bugs and spent time in creeks and just soaked it all up. So I think I caught the bug early on, so to speak, and was able to really channel that interest and passion into what I pursued in school and ultimately my career. So I feel very connected to this work and passionate about its outcomes.
Now, as a kid, did you have a lot of animals yourself?
Every once in a while, the always had dogs and cats around. We didn't keep any type of chickens or anything like that, but we definitely in the summer there were tadpoles and snakes and beetles and things like that that would make their way into various makeshift terrariums I would put together. And funny enough, doing that as a kid, I actually ended up getting paid to do that, working at a nature center as a teenager. So good job skills to develop.
Very cool. Was that your first job working at Nature Center?
Actually, my first job was selling popcorn at a movie theater, but soon after that, I worked many years as a camp counselor, helping to do nature programming for young people.
So then you went to college to study this field?
I did. I chose the school I went to is called Catawba College. It's in Salisbury, North Carolina, sort of right in between Charlotte and Greensboro. A relatively small school, but they have a very advanced and prestigious environmental program there. They have a preserve on campus. A lot of the work we do is very applied and hands-on and engages the community as a source for environmental literacy and advocacy. So it was a really great exposure for me to sort of transition sort of my love and passion for the outdoors and wildlife into thinking about what it meant for people in community and protecting the environment. I learned early on in my schooling that if the source of most environmental problems are the behaviors and choices that people make, then the best chance we have to protect wild nature is influencing and helping support people in making better decisions that affect our environment every day.
So when did you decide you want to make a career out of this?
I actually knew going into college. Felt very fortunate that way. I feel like even back then, and certainly now, it's not always the case that folks have a pretty clear idea of what they want. I will say, I did take a bit of a shift. I mentioned that concept of having to work with people. So, early on, I was most fascinated by just being in the field. Catching animals, turtles, watching birds, and I knew I could make a job out of that. But a lot of those jobs, whether it's scientific research or field work, aren't necessarily the best paying careers. They're wonderful careers, and I admire everyone that chooses to do that. But I was curious about what other options there were for my career. I wanted to go to grad school and get a more advanced degree, thinking about management, again, how we make decisions. I felt a little bit disconnected in the field and in research. A lot of the times, the habitats we were studying, the species we were looking at, we didn't have much say other than providing some usable data. Didn't have much say on the decisions that were made that ultimately affected the things we were learning about, the habitats. And so I was really interested in exploring that space, taking my passion for real world conservation and applying it more to the human-centered space around policy work, advocacy, and things of that nature.
So then did you eventually go to graduate school for this?
I did. I went straight to a 2-year program after graduating from Catawba, and I was at the Nicholas School of the Environment, which is at Duke University. Again, another program that I chose because it not only had a fantastic reputation in the conservation and environmental space, but also was only a 2-year program that was really more to sort of accelerate and advance folks either beginning or in the middle of their careers. So it was a great fit for me. And I really, really enjoyed my time at Duke and got to surround myself with a lot of really incredible thinkers and a lot of folks that have been really important to me as mentors and inspiration in this space that we're in to help better our environment.
And so how did Defenders of Wildlife come into play?
Great question. It's interesting. I remember as a kid reading Defenders of Wildlife magazine. I always loved them as an organization. They were one of the big ones that were around. Defenders actually been around for over 75 years, so they've been out there influencing generations of us. I started my career. I really got a bug for advocacy and making change. And so, leaving graduate school, I found myself working for a scrappy outfit here in Asheville. At the time, they were known as the Southern Appalachian Biodiversity Project, and they were a grassroots group, some paid, mostly volunteer folks working on public lands advocacy. I think your listeners will appreciate just how amazing of a landscape we get to enjoy and call home here in Western North Carolina. And part of that incredible assets are our public lands. And so I joined that group really looking to apply science to moving the needle on advocating for special places, old growth, favorite hiking trails, wild spots, habitats that were important. And I spent time with a lot of great folks there and was able to really grow as a professional and learn a lot about advocacy, about policymaking, about the way the law is stewarded in this country and what we do to make good decisions and choices. And over the years, I continued to focus my efforts with SABP. Actually, was there for about 11 years. We changed names throughout that history. We merged another organization based in Alabama to really cover a larger Southeast landscape. And so I really got to kind of grow up with this organization, basically starting from a small grassroots local group. And over the years, over a decade of work, took on more leadership roles, actually helped to build programs and hire and manage staff and really do a lot of project management and really do that at a larger scale over time. And so at about that time, I think the time of the transition was like 2014, 2015. I had heard that Defenders of Wildlife, again, an organization I had known and admired, always saw as this, and they are a much larger national organization. I knew they were interested in opening up a Southeast office for their field program. So I applied and was very grateful to have the chance to interview and ultimately get accepted into the position. It was a big leap for me at the time. Really, I think two challenges presented themselves, and they ultimately became incredible opportunities. The first challenge is that part of my region now included the state of Florida. And if you know anything about Florida, it's a lot of people, a lot of species, a lot of incredible habitats, and a lot of environmental issues. And I honestly, at the time, knew very little about that. And I was inheriting a very successful program in Florida. So that was the first challenge I faced. The second one was just how to orient myself to a new way of doing business. In the role I was in previously, although that was in a leadership role, we still, as staff of a very small organization, we all became Jacks and Janes of all trade. The youngest person was the default IT person. The
Right.
person who didn't mind answering the phone did most of our communications, whatever that looked like. But at Defenders, when it came to, let's say, writing a grant, we have an entire department that helps us with that. It's not just one individual. So I had to kind of get used to um, honing my craft on the things that, my job really required of me, and not trying to do too much, letting others teach me and utilize their skills and all of that. In a larger organization, it can be a little bit bureaucratic. It may not be as nimble as, especially those of us that are used to working in a small, scrappy organization. But my goodness, are we effective? And that's really been one of the big things I've come to understand and appreciate about organizations at the scale that Defenders operates, is that we can do a lot across a broad geography, really leverage a lot of talented people to important and critical decisions. So it's been a journey, and I've really enjoyed it. When I talk to young people or even my own kids, I talk about following your passions, dreaming big, setting goals, but just really more fundamentally how important it is to align yourself in your life with work that matters. I often quip, if you're spending majority of your time each day, do you want to live to work or work to live, right? It kind of boils down to that. And I feel very lucky. I sleep very well at night knowing I've done something good for the world and get to utilize my passions every day. So,
And one of the
I mean,
cool
it's not
things,
without its trials and tribulations, but I do enjoy it.
one of the cool things you mentioned, which I think hopefully listeners are picking up on, is that if you can be studying something in school, there are two things I'm picking up on what you're saying. One, if you can study something in school and then go into that field, that's pretty exciting because I don't know about you, but when I did that, it made school come alive. You were studying,
Absolutely.
as opposed to, no offense to trigonometry or something like that. Here was something you were studying, but you were living it on a daily basis. And I think that's really cool. But the other thing I'd like you to address too is the fact that if people are even thinking about going into this field, one of the great ways they can get in is by start thinking about doing some volunteer work in the field as well. And talk a little bit about that. That if people are interested in your field, how can they get involved or volunteer initially?
Yeah, both very great questions, and in my mind, they're quite connected. So you talk about, as a young person or as someone who's, in that sort of exploratory phase
Right.
of their early career, or just naturally curious. Um, I say that, as I said, this work does in fact make it real. That field work makes it real and tangible, and those connections are really important. And yeah, stepping outside the classroom, engaging with an organization or with an issue that you're passionate about, as a volunteer, as a student intern. There's multiple ways to, again, make those connections. And then really, those are the ways I think that really help to fuel our passion. One of the things I tell our interns each summer is, one of the great things about an internship is you have a chance to kind of have a trial period with a job, right? And see if it's something you, in fact, do want to do. I've had the experience of interns who've started with me. They're like, yeah, I'm really into computer modeling. And then they spend their summer doing that while we're all out in the field wrangling salamanders. You're like, you know what? I think I might want to do more of that. Or, conversely, people say, yeah, this is exactly what I want to do. So it's affirming. In our organization, like most, particularly those of us that are, member based, we're public service organizations. We do a lot to engage local communities. We do a lot to inspire and work with volunteers and interns, really help to train the next generation of environmental advocates. For folks who are interested in those types of opportunities, we do keep a running list on our website of volunteer opportunities, job opportunities, etc. But I'd also encourage folks here locally, if they're interested, we have an email address that's sort of a general mailbox for our office called southeastprogram@defenders.org. And if you email that address and just indicate that you're interested in volunteering, what maybe some of your skills or experiences may have been, or if you're interested in being an intern, we are always happy to work with people to put their passions and skills to work. And one of the other things I've really come to understand and be passionate about over these years of my career is recognizing that, volunteering and interning, we're not necessarily don't need to have folks with master's degree in science or someone who's only interested in, environmental issues. We work all the time with artists, musicians. We've worked with folks that do storytelling. There's so many ways. We've had folks volunteer to help with accounting and things of that nature. There's pretty much any skill that most folks possess, we can find a way to utilize it for change, for good, within our organization. And really, we love to do that. I think it makes us more attuned to the wide diversity of folks and skills that are out there, and really thinking about new ways of harnessing those to lead us towards a brighter future.
And that's a really good recommendation you gave to anybody who's listening, that if they are interested either in your organization or any other nonprofit as well, offer your skill set if you can and see if you can work in as opposed to just taking anything,
Exactly.
But since you mentioned also your email address, and I'll have you repeat that in a second, if folks also want to get information about you folks, the website is what?
So the website is plainly, it's just Defenders, so DEFENDERS.org, defenders.org.
And are you on social media as well?
We are Defenders of Wildlife in whether it's X or Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, all the social channels. You should be able to find our channels there. I'll also alert your listeners that we have specific Facebook groups that have a little bit more precision on the landscape. So, for example, if you don't just want to get our national broadcast, you can sign up for one of our groups. We have a group for North Carolina. So if you just again search Defenders of Wildlife on Facebook and type in NC, you'll find that group and you can join us. And that's a way to get a little more local information and news, learn about events that we're doing, or when we put out a call to volunteers. And that's something that folks can take a look at as well.
You're also mentioning an excellent bit of advice for folks, and that is if they come to volunteer and they have specific expertise in social media, I imagine you could put them in work in social media, or you would like to have volunteers that help in that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's what I've really, one of the things I've really tried to embrace, and one of the reasons why I really enjoy bringing especially student interns in, is they have an entirely different lived experience, and they're on the cutting edge of a lot of new technologies and ways of communicating, and can be a really good litmus test for like, hey, how does this message resonate with you in your life? So yeah, when it comes to communication, social media, we're always looking for fresh, diverse perspectives. Whether it's specific knowledge on topics or specific knowledge on the inner workings of how those systems function and how they grab attention. Those are all skills and passions we can put to work.
One of the great things I love about having you as a guest on this uh, episode of Blaine's World is that you also come from, I think, one of the great job titles or organization titles of all time, Defenders of Wildlife. Just
Yes.
and you the short, I guess, you just call it up top defenders.org. What is if I can, kind of what's a typical day in the life of Ben Prater? What does a typical day look like?
Well, that's one of my favorite questions because I get to throw out one of my favorite answers, which is there's no typical day.
Okay.
And that's an exciting thing. Maybe not for everyone. Some folks really do crave stability in the workplace. And I'm not talking about, job security and things like that, but I am talking about, as an organization doing the work we do with our mission focused on protecting wildlife and their habitats all across the country. There is no shortage of important work, no shortage of, unfortunately, crises we could be responding to, no shortage of species that need our attention and our support. And so really every day, really a typical day for us, myself included, really starts with just kind of assessing where the day's news is taking us. That's been especially challenging in the last few months with the new administration that does unfortunately seem hell-bent on making a lot of bad decisions when it comes to our environment and our wildlife. So, it starts digesting that information. Really, for me as a director, a lot of what I'm doing is working to facilitate support for my staff. So, uh, for example, like a typical day, like today, we had our staff meeting. So everybody in this morning got together. We give our updates from the week prior and talk about our priorities for the week ahead, and then we do a quick brainstorm to talk about, well, who do you need on this project? What's the deadline for that? And that's not that most exciting stuff, but that's just kind of how things run in an organization like ours. Everyone on my staff, with the exception of one other person, is spread out all over the region. So we use a lot of teleconferencing, a lot of email, things like that. But my day could go anywhere from a staff meeting to doing an evening podcast interview to going out to doing an event to looking at a document that I've got to provide edits on, whether it's a legal document or other things like that. And then, you know, this time tomorrow, I'll be in the field. I'll be out there looking for hellbender salamanders. So really a great variety of tasks that can keep us busy day to day. And I will say one of the, I think, things I love most about my job is that literally every day is an adventure. And the fact that we get to work in the field, really getting our hands and our boots on the ground, I think makes it all the more meaningful and enjoyable as well.
You mentioned salamanders. What are some of the other examples of wildlife that you deal with?
Of course. Well, so when we think about the Southeast, we are so blessed to have such rich diversity of wildlife. And that's, as I mentioned earlier about Defender's choice to open an office here, that was directly in response to how can an organization focused on biodiversity not be working in such a rich region like the Southeast. So for us, we tend to prioritize our work on species that are federally listed, meaning they are federally endangered or threatened. So they're really in a precarious position. They face the threat of extinction. And so we work on species like the Florida panther, Florida manatee. We work on red wolves. We work on a lot of forest bat species. We work on several amphibians, reptiles, migratory songbirds. We're really, and gopher tortoises, really a whole host of species across a lot of different taxa. And one of the things that is kind of common amongst a lot of those critters is that many of them are what we call keystone species. For example, the gopher tortoise that I mentioned, by virtue of the way it lives its life and the burrows it digs, it directly or indirectly supports 341 other species that utilize its same habitat. So by protecting gopher tortoises, you get that economy of scale, to put it crudely, for biodiversity conservation. So we're oftentimes looking to focus our efforts where it's needed, so where there's a high degree of imperilment, and also where those species are not only in peril, but also their loss could have really dramatic effects throughout the web of life in their specific habitats. And so that's why we tend to focus on these keystone or highly interactive species, as well as controversial species. We're not shy about needing to be a voice for predators like wolves, panthers, other large omnivores, carnivores, bears, things like that as well. And the way we try to go at that work is really helping to meet people where they are. We realize that we have kind of the benefit of wild things will do a pretty good job of taking care of and managing themselves, but people have to give them the space that they need to do so. But that could be a challenge, particularly with predators that may be competing for resources or impacting livestock. So we try to work with communities on a big effort, which is almost kind of a cultural, philosophical idea around coexistence. What are the things we can do? What are the steps we can take to incentivize folks doing the right thing or to minimize any kind of harm to either the species or to people's pocketbooks?
In
So
terms
that's a
of
really exciting space to work in as well.
in terms of endangered species,
Mhm.
um, are all animals in the area endangered?
No, not at all. We have is many species, some of which have very robust populations. I mentioned bear earlier, so black bear in Western North Carolina are quite the conservation success story, as are a lot of our other large game species. Thereby things like deer, wild turkey. These animals are quite common, but at one time they were not. So some of the conservation methods we use to bring back those animals very successfully are still being applied and utilized today to bring back species that have not had such a concerted effort in the past to restore them.
And so I guess that creates, though, kind of another kind of problem, or just in reverse. you mentioned bears, for example, or if there are too many bears out there, or if there are too many bears, unfortunately being killed or trapped or whatever the
Right.
case is, that's kind of a sad story too. That it,
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. There has to be a way to strike a balance, and it's interesting that you bring up bear, and we talk about the fact that it's not an endangered species. However, still a species that people interact with, that we need to learn to coexist with. And what we often say, particularly in Florida, is that if people can coexist effectively with black bears, then things like a Florida panther is piece of cake. Totally different animal, literally. So what we try to do is to think about the species like black bear that people are having challenges with in real time. Whether it's managing your waste and your garbage properly to not attract bears, to not have your bird feeders out during when bears are actively feeding. And so those are the kind of behaviors and the kind of ways of being and doing that people can embrace so that if at the time comes where we need to ask folks to give a little more or do a little more or just be aware or keep doing the same thing they're doing to make room and space for a species that's recovering from the brink of extinction, it's a much easier glide path. And so I think in a lot of ways, really wildlife as a whole have so much to teach us, regardless of sort of their population status. But I think what's critical to remember is that, as we risk losing species, this really does have a domino effect on even common species. So we need to be very careful about that. And that's really just an aspect of our work to kind of help us to prioritize and focus is to think about the species that are in most in need of help right now.
if folks want to get involved, Ben, I guess a couple of ways we've talked about. One, they can get involved as a volunteer.
Mhm.
One, I assume that if people want to contribute to the cause, you welcome people to make contributions as well.
Absolutely. We're a 501c nonprofit organization. So our work and the efforts that we sustain depends on the generous support of public gifts and donations. And so we're always more than happy to begin a relationship in that way as well. We know that we can put those resources to good work, and we've got a proven track record to demonstrate that. And we would love to have folks check us out, whether you're interested in giving or not, just are curious and want to learn, to go to our website, defenders.org. Click around a bit, explore. Hopefully, you'll learn a few things. Check out some of the links to explore some of your favorite species or ones you're curious about to learn more about the great work we do. I'm very proud of our blog. We do a lot of great blog posts on a weekly basis to sort of explore the current conservation picture in our nation. And so I encourage folks to check that out as well.
And
Because at the
again,
end of the day, really at the root of good, strong advocacy is being informed. And so even if it's just a casual read of a blog or following a social media channel, these are ways to stay informed, stay up to date, and makes you a better advocate down the road.
and so you mentioned the website. Can they also subscribe to the blog on the website as well?
Yeah, yes.
And the blog comes out what, weekly or?
Yeah, it depends. If there's a big news, we have a press shot. We have news and blog. If you go to our website, and the news is just every press release. Those can be multiple a day, especially these days. And then our blog is a little more routine, maybe once a week. We've got a new exciting piece of storytelling to share with folks.
And again, back to what you talked about earlier, folks hopefully will pick up the idea that if they want to get involved, whatever their skills, not just your organization, but other organizations could use them as well. And so back to you, even as a student or in Boy Scouts or something, that if you can find whatever it is that you're interested in and pursue that, you're going to have a great life, or hopefully you'll have a great life if that be the case.
Absolutely, you'll make a lot of great friends along the way as well.
And if you imagine doing what you enjoy doing, and that really is cool.
Yeah.
Then one final time, the website and also your email address.
Sure. So the website is defenders.org, and the best email address to use to contact my team is southeastprogram@defenders.org as well.
Okay, I'd like to thank you for being my guest this edition of the Blanchard webcast. Also, like to thank my producer, Cappy Setti. Hopefully, one of these days we'll actually bump into you in person at one of these events or one of the things I know you do well too. You love speaking, and I assume that's something else people should take advantage of if they want to get a speaker on this topic? They can contact your organization.
Yes, thanks for mentioning that, Blaine. We are always more than happy to come out to your civic group, your community group, your whatever that looks like for you, and speak on a topic that you find relevant or interested in. Also, right now is a tough time for our public lands, and so we are sort of on the circuit right now, doing a lot of speaking engagements about the importance of protecting our parks and forests. So you can look for us probably coming to a neighborhood near you soon.
Okay. I'd like to thank you for all the good work you do. Also, again, thank my producer, Captain Setti. Like I said, one of these days we may even bump into each other, Ben. That'd be
That
great.
sounds great. Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
man.
It's good being with you today.
Likewise.